Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something wild, the absolute deepest intellectual shield humans have ever built against the truth. We're unpacking the second part of the Pharaonic wave, titled The Four Faces of the Idol. We're going to see exactly how the enemies of historical prophets systematically weaponized one specific thing, nationalism, to cover up their own complete and total lack of logic. It's a fascinating deep dive, so let's get into it. So, let's kick things off with a massive philosophical mystery. Why on earth do people aggressively reject crystal clear logic? Our sources point out that throughout human history, when people are confronted with undeniable truths or just pure rationality, especially when it challenges the societal norms they grew up with, they don't just passively disagree, they actively and sometimes violently reject it. It's this incredibly fascinating psychological phenomenon. I mean, why choose an obvious falsehood over a clearly articulated truth? Well, to answer that, we first have to define a very specific term from our source texts. The word is tagut. Now, usually when we hear about false divinities or idols, we immediately picture physical statues, right? Like something carved from stone or wood. But the text provides a much deeper definition. A tagut is literally anything taken beyond its true nature. It could be an idea, a person, a system, or even a tradition that gets elevated so far beyond its actual worth that it becomes this massive barrier to ultimate truth. It's basically an intellectual idol that blocks our ability to process reality. Now, the sources actually identify four main drivers, or four faces of this idolatry. First, you have the superstitions aspect, which is surprisingly the least deeply rooted in human nature. People often kind of know it's a myth, but they just lean into wishful thinking. Then there's the national aspect, nationalism. Third is authority, like when a political leader just bluffs their people into blind obedience. And fourth is the origin aspect. But for today's explainer, we are going completely in-depth on the second one on this list, because the sources argue it is, without a doubt, the most deeply rooted and dangerous barrier in the human heart.
Section 1. Nationalism, the deepest idol. So, nationalism isn't just about modern political borders, right? It's this profound, deep-seated psychological allegiance. Listen to this quote. "Rather, we will follow that which we found our fathers upon." This highlights a massive historical reality. Most people don't actually hold deep theological beliefs in the myths of their ancestors. Instead, they just cling to those traditions as a form of national or tribal identity. For them, this inherited identity is placed completely above the truth. When presented with logical revelation, their default response is basically, nope, we're just going to keep doing what our fathers did. It's a total intellectual dead end masquerading as loyalty.
All right, moving into section 2, Jesus, peace be upon him, breaking Levantine traditions.
To see this clash between truth and tradition in action, I want you to picture the raw, almost biopunk-style Levantine wilderness. Enter Jesus, peace be upon him. He's acting as a second Adam, completely unburdened by urban, institutional corruption, and he steps right into a society entirely locked down by its own rigid religious and nationalistic traditions. The Pharisees try to set a trap. They rely on these inherited rules, complaining that his hungry disciples were breaking the law by picking grain on the Sabbath. But he doesn't take the bait. He doesn't engage in dry legal debate. Instead, he uses pure nomadic logic. He reminds them of their own revered King David eating forbidden bread when he was starving, and then he drops this absolute logical hammer. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Boom. He shatters the establishment's obsession with rigid rules, prioritizing human necessity and pure logic over empty ritual. We see this profound shift again in another really famous encounter. The urban institutions drag in an adulterous woman, and they're basically trying to trap him between breaking their legal code or abandoning his message of mercy. His devastating response, which he delivers after calmly drawing in the dirt, doesn't attack the law itself. Instead, it entirely dismantles the hypocritical authority of the judges. By just saying, "He who is without sin casts the first stone," he forces them to face their own hidden flaws, and they retreat. They are defeated not by an army, but by piercing, unavoidable reality. The irony here is just incredible. The urban establishment, the very people who styled themselves as the ultimate guardians of the law and tradition, completely abandoned logic. They couldn't defeat his reasoning, so they just dug their heels in to protect their social status and inherited hierarchies from his raw, desert-born wisdom. True wisdom, functioning like a nomadic assembly, relies on direct truth, survival, and what the texts call fitra, which is essentially a pure, uncorrupted state of innocence.
Okay, Section 3, Muhammad, peace be upon him, labeled the renegade.
Jumping forward in history, we find the exact same pattern playing out. Muhammad, peace be upon him, arrives with a message of pure logic and submission to the one creator. And by the way, this was a direct continuation of the exact same message given earlier, aligning perfectly with the ancient Aramaic concepts of Allah for God and Mashla Nanuda for the way of peace and surrender. But he ran directly into a brick wall of deeply ingrained fanatical tribalism. The polytheists of the Crush tribe faced a massive problem. They absolutely could not defeat his flawless logic, and they couldn't find a single moral flaw in his character. So what did they do? They resorted to a terrifying, highly effective media trick. They labeled him Al-Sabi, or the renegade. They didn't attack his arguments, they attacked his alignment with their national identity.
This escalating media war of Mecca is practically a masterclass in how nationalism is weaponized. First, they tried the classic tactic: ignore and mock him, try not to take him seriously. But that totally failed because his logic was just too strong. Next, they tried to discredit his words by labeling him a poet or a magician. But that completely crumbled under any serious textual analysis of his recitations. So finally, they hit the jackpot. They labeled him Al-Sabi. By painting him as a traitor to the tribe, they triggered raw, emotional tribal fanaticism. Once they did that, it didn't matter what he said. The emotional trigger successfully blinded the mob to the truth.
They even leveraged this Dark Age motto that was super popular in pre-Islamic Arabia: help your brother whether he is the oppressor or the oppressed. Think about that for a second. This perfectly showcases the toxic core of nationalism. It's this idea that you absolutely must blindly back your tribe, even when you know for a fact that they are fundamentally and morally corrupt. It's the ultimate rejection of objective truth in favor of an inherited group identity. Which brings us to our final part. Section 4, Truth Above the Tribe. So what's the solution? Well, it requires a total paradigm shift. The sources assert that while false beliefs, superstitions, and nationalism inherently divide humanity into warring, rival factions, ultimate truth actually acts as the great unifier. The goal here is to elevate humanity above nationalism and to elevate objective truth above them both, uniting people under one cosmic reality. To actually reach this unified state, the text outlined this brilliant three-step allegorical process of intellectual evolution. First, you start as the camel. You're just a beast of burden, passively carrying the heavy, unearned baggage of societal norms and traditions without ever questioning them. Second, you must transform into the lion. This is the active and sometimes pretty fierce process of emptying out those false weights and actively challenging your inherited biases. Finally, you become the child. This is a return to Fitra, our pure, uncorrupted baseline of consciousness where we can view the universe with objective, innocent logic. So as the embers of our glowing neon campfire start to fade, I want to leave you with this provocative thought to carry with you. When you look really closely at your own convictions, how many of your beliefs were actually discovered by you through pure logic, and how many were just handed to you in the heavy bags of your own tribe's traditions? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning everything, and I'll catch you next time.